and he'll be the moderator for tonight.
Thank you, JL. I don't believe that JL's joke really set the bar too high, so we're off to a good spot. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's Republican gubernatorial debate, sponsored by the Daily News, the Nebraska Republican Party, and certainly also with Norfolk High School. As JL mentioned, my name is Kent Warnicke. I serve as editor of the Norfolk Daily News, and I'm very pleased to see so many of you here tonight. The turnout, I believe, is an indication that the democratic process of learning about candidates and making informed choices on Election Day is alive and well in Northeast Nebraska, and that's a credit to all of you. So give yourselves a round of applause. Before we proceed any further, let me bring to the stage and introduce the 6 men who are the reason we're here tonight. If they would join us, first, Mr. Mike Foley. Mr. John Bruning. Mr. Brian Sloan. Mr. Tom Carlson. Mr. Pete Ricketts. And Mr. Bo McCoy. At this point, I'd ask you all to rise. We're going to be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by 2 Norfolk High students, Allison Lambert and Kaylee Philbrick, followed by an invocation given by the Reverend Ray Wilkie of Grace Lutheran Church here in Norfolk. We'll begin with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And the wisdom of the knowledge of God. We've come here this evening, O Lord, to acknowledge your wisdom and your authority both in heaven and on earth. We've come also to declare ourselves subject to your authority. We know that you pay attention to governments because you ordain them. You also expect us to be subject to them. It is for this reason that we call upon your name and your blessing as we discuss who shall become the next governor of our state. We know this to be a serious matter, and that the judgments and administrations handed down by this governance bear the mark of your very own authority. We search your very word to know how we shall view this matter of electing governing authorities. You have declared in your word, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those authorities that exist have been instituted by God. We therefore pray for those who seek such authority, and also for ourselves who shall support and stand under the protection of such authority. We ask that the conversations this evening be respectful and helpful toward electing the person of your choosing, that your name be glorified, and we, the people of God, might benefit. We ask this in the strong name of our resurrected Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Wilkie. As indicated by the applause when the candidates were introduced, some of you obviously have candidates that you may already have a preference for. It's certainly an impressive group of candidates. But let me, just as JL did and Reverend Wilkie did, let me encourage the audience to refrain from disruptive applause or other verbal outbursts during the debate. Politeness and civility should be the order of the day, which shouldn't be hard because, after all, you are Republicans. Before we begin with opening comments from the candidates, allow me to introduce our panel of media representatives seated on the opposite side of the stage. They are Jerry Genther, regional editor of the Norfolk Daily News. Susan Reisinger, news director of WJAG Radio in Norfolk. And Jenna Renstrom, news anchor with KCAU TV in Sioux City. Now we begin with opening comments. The order of speaking was determined earlier this evening, so now we begin with each candidate having 90 seconds. I should note that on the stage there is a timing light here at the Johnny Carson Theater that will alert the candidates when their time is drawing to a close. We begin with Mr. Foley.
Thank you very much, and good evening. Let me begin with just a quick shout-out to my beautiful Nebraska farm girl wife, Susan Seeker Foley from Elmwood, Cass County, Nebraska. Thank you, Susan. And to my children who are watching and listening online. 14 months ago, before this campaign began in earnest, I received a very powerful letter from a very prominent Nebraskan urging me to run for governor. And in his letter, he discussed some of the problems and the challenges that we face as a state. And he closed out his letter by saying, "Mike, I see you as an honorable man who cannot be bought." Signed, Tom Osborne. And with his encouragement and that of my wife, my family, we entered this race because Nebraska does have some very serious challenges facing us. Every candidate in this race is going to tell you that he's pro-life. Every candidate in this race is going to tell you that he believes in fiscal discipline, and transparency, and accountability. In my case, I walk the talk. Serving in the unicameral legislature, I championed 5 pro-life bills to the governor's desk, and I got to know Ernie Chambers really well because he fought me all the way, and that's fine, because I was willing to stand up and take the punches for the cause. And as your state auditor the past 8 years, I've rattled the cages down there in Lincoln. And I've held people accountable, even when they didn't want to be held accountable, because they're spending $10 billion a year of our money. And they must be held to an account when they misspend. I've dug deep into every facet.
Mr. Foley, we probably need to move on.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Next up is Mr. Carlson.
Thank you. And I introduce very quickly the apple of my eye, my wife Margot, right back there. I'm glad that she's here with me tonight. I want to tell you a little bit about my background and why I believe that I'm qualified to be governor of the state of Nebraska. I am rural through and through. Grew up on a farm north of Holdrege, and we still have the family farmland. I was in college as a professor and a football and baseball coach for 10 years, so I had some experience in the public sector. I moved back to Holdrege in I'm going to tell you when, and went into small business, insurance and financial advising as a partner. Did that for 30 years. There's no substitute for the kind of experience that you get in small business, which is the engine that runs Nebraska. I was elected to the legislature in 2006, and in my 8 years of serving in the legislature, my colleagues elected me chair of the Ag Committee, and I served for 4 years. And the last 2 years, they elected me chair of the Natural Resources Committee, and I've done that for 2 years. I have the mix, and I think the right mix, of experience, leadership, that makes me qualified to be governor. Governor is an individual that needs to have people work together for the benefit of the citizens of the state. I've proven that I can do that in the legislature, and I would do that in the state of Nebraska. But in order to do that, I've got to have your help, I've got to have your backing, I've got to have your support, and I know that together we can make the good life even better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Mr. McCoy.
Well, good evening, and thank you. I'm Bo McCoy, and it's exciting to be here with you tonight. I first want to thank the Norfolk Daily News and the Nebraska Republican Party for putting together this event. It's a pleasure to be back in Norfolk. Northeast Community College is where I began my college education. My wife Shauna and our 4 kids, Audrey, Ryan, Nora, and Tess, wave everybody, are here tonight. Audrey's been my highly paid and hardworking debate coach for tonight, so thank you, kiddo. From growing up in agriculture on our family's cattle ranch to owning and operating a home improvement small business today, to building a rock-solid conservative record the last 6 years in the legislature, we go through life as a family, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Tonight, I am announcing my plan to grow Nebraska in my first term as governor, and I want to share part of that plan with you. Being governor is about getting results. My granddad used to say, don't be a cowboy that's all hat and no cattle. Your actions speak louder than your words. Here's my guarantee to you, the people of Nebraska. As governor, I'll help create 10,000 new jobs and go anywhere, anytime, to attract new businesses to Nebraska. I'll travel 100,000 miles to countries around the world, opening up new markets. And I'll reduce property taxes by $100 million. If I don't get it done, I won't run for re-election. It's that simple. I'm Bo McCoy. Let's grow Nebraska.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Mr. Ricketts.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Norfolk Daily News and Kent, you, our distinguished journalists, as well as the Republican Party, and of course my lovely wife, Suzanne, without whose love and support none of this would be possible. The key question of this race is, how do we grow Nebraska? I've traveled 30,000 miles across the state talking to people just exactly about this. And my priorities as governor will be to improve educational outcomes for all of our kids. And in particular, I want to focus on career and vocational training. We also have to grow the economy, especially agriculture. Agriculture is the heart and soul of what we do here in Nebraska. It drives our economy, and 25% of our folks are employed in it. That's why I put together a plan about how we grow agriculture here in Nebraska. And just today I released my plan on how we grow manufacturing as well. And then how do we create more and better paying jobs here in the state? That is what we have to focus on. This is where my business experience becomes so important. When I joined Ameritrade, we had 150 people working in Omaha, and now there are 2,000 in Nebraska and 6,000 across the country. I want to bring my business experience to state government, to manage costs, make wise investments, and grow jobs. You'll see we'll cut taxes and get rid of useless regulation so that we can unleash the potential here in this state for you, your family, and your futures. We'll grow jobs and grow Nebraska. That's my vision, and I ask for your vote.
It's now the turn for Mr. Bruning.
Thanks, Kent. Well, first I want to introduce my wife, Dion. Honey, thank you for 18 years of wonderful marriage. And I want to talk to the voters of this state and tell you what a privilege it is to stand before you tonight as a candidate for governor. You know, this state has been very blessed. We've had two great governors, Mike Johans and Dave Heineman. And I've worked very closely alongside both of them for our conservative values. As state senator and attorney general, I've been tested. I am prepared to lead. As your next governor, I will deliver results. It will not be rhetoric. Now, I've cut taxes, I've reduced spending, I've promoted agriculture, I've defended life, I've protected our gun rights, and I've rejected amnesty. And I'm the conservative here tonight on this stage who's pushed back against the regulation and the overreach by an out-of-control federal government. I've walked the walk. I've taken action. And this campaign is about the future. I can't wait for the opportunity to grow Nebraska as your next governor. I'll cut taxes to help agriculture grow. I'll cut regulations to help small businesses grow, improve education and public safety to help our children and our families grow. Nebraskans know that I'm tested and I'm experienced. I'm passionate about our state, and I am ready to lead on day one. Thank you.
Last but not least, Mr. Sloan.
Thank you very much, Ken, and thanks for all the sponsors, for the journalists, and for everybody who came out tonight. I'm Brian Sloan, and for those of you who don't know me, you might know me as the Reagan guy. I grew up in small towns around Nebraska, including Neely, but mostly in the Panhandle, went to school in Lincoln. I'm a CPA and a lawyer educated in Lincoln. But shortly after graduating from law school, I married my wife, Leslie, who is here tonight. Thank you, Leslie. She's my driver and my speech critic. That comes later tonight. But shortly after graduating from law school, I was given the privilege of going to Washington and working for Congressman Hal Dobb, who was on the Ways and Means Committee, to work on Ronald Reagan's tax bill, the largest tax reform bill in the history of this country. It reduced the rate from 50% to 28% and kicked off a growth of the economy for 2 decades. It was a flat tax approach. After that bill passed, I was asked by the Reagan administration to become assistant to the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service to implement that bill, and also to be responsible for congressional relations on all tax administration items. That was a great privilege, and so is the privilege of running for governor. The number one issue in this state is taxes. It's property taxes and income taxes, and will we ever get tax reform done? Governor Heinemann, my friend for 28 years, has left a wonderful legacy, but we've got to get tax reform done, and I've got 30 years of experience to do it.
Thank you very much to all of you, and we now move on to questions from our media panel. They will ask a question that all the candidates will answer, and each of the candidates will have no more than 90 seconds to respond. The first question will be from Jerry Genther of the Daily News. It will be directed first to Mr. Bruning, followed by Mr. Carlson, Mr. Foley, Mr. McCoy, Mr. Ricketts, and Mr. Sloan.
There's a perception that Omaha and Lincoln get most of the money for road projects. Do you think that perception is accurate?
Well, Jerry, thank you for that question. I would tell you that roads have to be a priority in this state, and as governor, they will be a priority for me. I don't know exactly where my opponents stand on this particular issue, but I have said that I am open to roads bonding. I think we are in a very unique interest rate environment today. And I'm very proud of the legislature and now U.S. Senator, then State Senator Deb Fischer's Build Nebraska Act that helped grow roads across this state. I think our infrastructure is critical to our rural communities. And not just roads, by the way, digital infrastructure as well. So as governor, I'm going to make road funding a priority, and certainly not just for Omaha and Lincoln. My wife Dion's a farm girl. My family's owned our farm in Bruning since 1879. I understand rural Nebraska, and I care deeply about the success of rural Nebraska. So I can assure you, as governor, I will work very, very hard to make sure rural Nebraska has its fair share of road funding. And, I've joked here in Norfolk, the road when you head down toward Omaha, toward West Point, that's pretty bumpy. And that's Exhibit A on why we need to get some more roads funding, especially for our rural communities.
Thank you, Mr. Bruning. Mr. Carlson, your turn.
Thank you for the question, Jerry. And to answer it, I would say to a certain extent, I think there is a problem with revenue going a little bit too much to Lincoln and Omaha. If you take the population of Lincoln and Omaha out, then we can say that about 50% of our population actually lives in a rural setting. And I think roads projects should be aimed so that it's about 50% urban and about 50% rural. We obviously have to have a good system of roads and bridges. That's important for every citizen in the state because they want to be able to go where they want to go, get there safely, and enjoy the trip. But it's absolutely essential for commerce. And as we move forward and make Nebraska a healthy place in which to live and one that's prosperous, both rural and urban, we've got to have a good system of roads and bridges. And, of course, this is the first year that we're feeling the effect of the quarter-cent sales tax that's going to the Department of Roads. I like the list of projects that they've put out where they are going to attempt to build over the next few years. I think we need to observe the effect of this quarter-cent sales tax and how much that enables them to do. But we have to get the job done for good roads and bridges. And there's ways that we have to spend money in the state. And certainly good roads and bridges is one of those ways.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Mr. Foley.
Thank you. I want to tip my hat as well to former Senator Deb Fischer, former state senator, now U.S. Senator Deb Fischer, for carrying LB 84 a few years ago. And LB 84 restructures the sales tax formula, which will now bring forward tens of millions of dollars of new funding, additional funding for road building. That's crucial to the future of Nebraska. As state auditor, I'm frustrated sometimes because I can get into these agencies and I can push on them and I can find the problems and I can offer recommendations, but I can't direct them to make those changes. And when I become the governor, the Department of Roads is going to report to me, and I'm going to make sure that those dollars are divvied up properly and fairly so that people will not be suspicious of whether or not Lincoln and Omaha are getting more than their fair share. People should be assured that these agencies are being run properly and fairly, and that the money and the resources of the state are being allocated in a just manner. And I can assure you that will happen when Mike Foley is the governor of Nebraska.
Thank you, Mr. Foley. Mr. McCoy, your turn.
Well, thank you. That's a very important question. Roads funding is critical in infrastructure to the future of Nebraska. I know that very well, having grown up in agriculture and experiencing moving, in our case, cattle to market. For many farmers and ranchers, that's very vital to their livelihood, and it's vital to the livelihood of our state. You know, a lot of the funding does go to eastern end of the state in Omaha, Lincoln, because that's where the lion's share of the population is in our state. But it's just as important in western Nebraska for roads to be finished, like the Heartland Expressway, for here in northeast Nebraska to have Highway 275 be finished to be 4-lane, particularly with all the growth here, with Nucor and Tejas and other companies that are vital to the future of jobs in Nebraska. And I, too, am for bonding for highways, because if it's done properly, because I think that these projects, Highway 81, Highway 30, Highway 275, Heartland Expressway, have to be finished for economic development to continue in Nebraska. It needs to be done wisely, and much like has been talked about, Deb Fischer and her decision to courageously be bold and continue with the Build Nebraska Act, I believe very strongly in infrastructure for all of Nebraska.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Mr. Ricketts.
Yeah, thank you very much. To the folks here in the audience tonight driving up on 275, I feel your pain. You know, I talk a lot on the campaign trail about cutting expenses. But one thing you learn in business is you can't cut your way to growth. You have to make wise investments. And that's why when I put out my plan for growing agriculture and now manufacturing here in the state, I talk about the importance in investing in infrastructure. And you can see it here in your own town, right? You look at Tejas Tubular. That was a great collaboration between the state of Nebraska, the city of Norfolk, and Nucor to make sure we had the proper infrastructure, in this case natural gas, so that you could bring 200 jobs here to the Norfolk area, great paying jobs. That's what you can do when you properly invest. And that's why I put that investment in roads in my plans. I agree that absolutely LB 84 was a smart way to budget, like an adult, for how the money we need for our roads. And in fact, I invest in early stage companies not because they have revenue now, but because I expect them to have revenue in the future. I see that potential. And I'd like to work with the Department of Roads to bring that same idea to them. They do a lot based on traffic count, which is why so much ends up in our urban areas. But we have the opportunity to create economic development by building roads and improve traffic counts, to create more traffic counts. And I'd like to bring that idea to our state government. It's important that we invest in roads and other infrastructure projects like gas, the Universal Service Fund, to have broadband access. All these things will help us grow Nebraska, and that's what I intend to do as governor.
Thank you, Mr. Ricketts. Mr. Sloan.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. When I announced for governor in December, I announced a 3-point plan. One was around tax reform, one was around education reform, and the third point was strategic investments in infrastructure. And roads is a key part of that, as you all well know here. The issue with our roads budget and how we prioritize projects is it is based on generally wheel count, with very little or no economic analysis. One of the things we have to do in the state government, and this is, I'm a CPA, so bear with me. One of the things we have to do in the state government is make sure that we've got accountability and metrics for how we spend our money. In the roads budget, we need to base roads based on analysis of what is the economic impact in this state of those roads. If we're going to grow this state, then we've got to have that kind of accountability. And I disagree with Mr. Bruning and I disagree with Mr. McCoy on the issue of bonding. I will not support a general bonding bill to create one more general fund for this legislature to spend. What I will do is support bonding on a project-by-project basis if you can prove the economic impact. I will not buy highways to nowhere and expect that we're going to get those economic results. If there is a plan and if the numbers prove that we can finance that bonding, then I'll be open to bonding, but only on a project-by-project basis.
Thank you very much. Next up is a question from Jenna Renstrom. It will be directed first to Mr. Sloan, followed by Mr. Ricketts, Mr. McCoy, Mr. Foley, Mr. Carlson, and then Mr. Bruning.
Good evening.
Farming is becoming an increasingly less popular career path for young people in Nebraska and all over the country, really. So what can be done to keep more young Nebraskans in the business of agriculture?
Well, I think there's even a bigger question, if you allow me to do it. I grew up in small towns across the state, Laurel, Neely, Crete, Gordon, Gearing. In almost every case, those towns are smaller than they were 20 years ago. In many counties, we have many cities that are smaller than they were 50 years ago. The real question is how are we going to keep young people in this state? And we have to create opportunities. In the ag area, we have to increase livestock production to provide more opportunities. But sometimes it's as simple as a question of housing. In many ag areas in this state, we don't have sufficient housing for the next generation to take over the next farm. I don't believe in government programs to make this happen, but I do believe in the development of small cities. When we talk about economic development, we need to develop this entire state, not just the eastern corridor. And that's going to take balancing a number of balls at once. We have to get fundamental tax reform. Young people will not stay and seek opportunities here at 6.84% taxes. Secondly, we have to build the infrastructure, and it's not just roads, it's fiber. When you look at this next generation, they are not going to live in a state where they have very slow fiber speeds or no internet speed whatsoever. That is just a reality, and we have to bring it to every community in this state. And finally, we've got to involve more young people in the government. I was fortunate. I was 29 when Ronald Reagan appointed me to a federal position. We need more young people in our government.
Thank you, Mr. Sloan. Mr. Ricketts.
Well, Jenna, thank you very much for that question. And I would refer you to my website where you can find my plan on growing agriculture because I specifically addressed this point in there. But just to cover some of the highlights on it, one of the things you look at the state of Nebraska, and we have more farmers and ranchers over 65 than we do under 45. So we do need to get our young people involved. And it's a very capital-intensive business. It's expensive. And so I want to continue to support some of the programs that we have in place, such as the 100 Beef Cow Advantage program, the 100-acre program. And from the state standpoint, the personal tax, property tax relief so that our young folks have the opportunity to be able to get into agriculture. And one of the other things we need to do is think about how technology has impacted agriculture just like every other business. And we have fewer farm and ranch families. So what we have to do to make sure we have thriving small towns and rural communities is have other economic activity. And that's why I released my plan on manufacturing. Because if we can create those good manufacturing jobs in our small towns, that'll help create that economic, that disposable income. You know, I talked to Chief Industries. They'll pay a welder $20 an hour. When you have that kind of disposable income, that will support the access to health care, restaurants, shopping, all those quality of life issues that young people say are so important to them when they're considering whether or not they're going to move back to their small town, their hometown. We have to develop those to make sure that we have a strong small town as well as a strong ag community.
Thank you, Mr. Ricketts. Mr. McCoy.
Thank you. I'll tell you the number one thing that we can do to keep more young people in agriculture, cut property taxes. You know, when we have valuations that have gone up this year, almost 25% on ag land across the state of Nebraska, it becomes very, very difficult for our farmers and ranchers to compete, particularly young farmers and ranchers that would like to either stay in their family operation or maybe start farming or ranching. You know, our property taxes in Nebraska are the third highest in America, behind California and Texas, way higher than any other ag state around us or anywhere in the country. You know, this year I'm very proud. For the first time, it's been talked about for many, many years, we actually added a sales tax exemption that will help farmers and ranchers for ag parts and labor. That's a big deal. It's a big deal for rural Nebraska. It's a big deal for our farmers and ranchers and implement dealers. And I'll tell you the last thing that I think is very important to keep young farmers and ranchers here. Perhaps the second most important behind property taxes, get rid of the inheritance tax. Because if you're going to pass your operation on, it becomes very difficult to do that if you have to give up part of your operation in order to pay an inheritance tax and lose land that's been in your family for generations.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Mr. Foley, your turn.
Thank you very much. You know, I've been very blessed in my life to have married into a farm family. Susan and her family successfully farmed out in Cass County, Nebraska for generations. And it went very well. But what about that next generation? Why won't they take up the farm? The farms have gotten larger. The ag lands have gone up in valuation tremendously. Farm equipment is so much more expensive than it ever was before. How can the young farm family take over a new farm, start a new farm? It's extraordinarily difficult. Tremendous challenge. We've got to face up to this because so many of our farmers are retiring. If you look at the ages of our current farmers, it's getting older and older. And the next generations, they're not stepping forward the way we'd like them to. We've got a couple of programs. We've got the Beginning Farmer Tax Credit Program. We've got a Retiring Farmer Program where he can transition out of farming, get a break for doing it by training a new young farmer. We've got to look at those programs very seriously and maybe retool them. Are they really working? And if they're not, what's wrong with them? And let's look at the experience of other states. Pick up some tricks from what they're doing and put them into effect. As my role as a state auditor, I learn about these details of state government operations. And I want to bring that knowledge forward to serve you as your next governor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Foley. Mr. Carlson.
Thank you for the opportunity on this question. I think that we have some opportunities in agriculture over the next several years. Agriculture is our number one industry. It needs to stay that way. The lifeblood of agriculture is water. Senator McCoy helped me pass a bill, LB 1098, this last session, that set up the state of Nebraska on a path toward water sustainability, which means that in the long run we're not going to use any more water on average year by year than what our supply gives us, because water is valuable. And for agriculture to remain number one, we have to be sustainable in our water use so that we can increase our production and we have more opportunities on the farm. I've heard Senator McCoy say this in a previous forum that we surpassed Texas in cattle on feed. That's a good thing. Part of the reason we did it is because they don't have the water resource that we do. And so we have opportunity in livestock production. That's another way to get people more involved in the farm. It is so important that we manage our water resource, which is so vital to the state of Nebraska, and manage it in a good way. That's our best opportunity to keep things healthy in agriculture so that we can have more people involved, we can expand livestock production, we give more opportunities for young people to be there, and it helps them to live the good life even better. We need to go hard in that direction and make sure that we accomplish what we need to do as far as water is concerned for agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Mr. Bruning.
I can't wait to attack this problem as governor. I think taxes, you start with taxes. We have to reduce property taxes. Everywhere I go in this state, people talk about property taxes being too high. They've gone up 25, 30, 35% in recent years, but we haven't seen levies go down. That's the first problem. The inheritance tax, an enormous problem. We have to get rid of the inheritance tax. So you start with tax policy. That's the first place to get young farmers to want to stay in farming. But the other side of it that no one on this stage has mentioned, and we have to talk about it, and I've done it as Attorney General and I'll do it as Governor, is push back against the regulatory regime. Right now in this country, we have a federal government that's out of control. I've challenged EPA 39 times as Attorney General. Continue to push back to keep energy costs low. EPA wants to make energy costs go up. They want a very marginal environmental gain for a massive cost. We have to change that. I've fought back against EPA. I know how to do it. I'll do it as governor. But it's not just EPA that's a threat to agriculture. It's HSUS, the Humane Society of the United States. Governor Heinemann and I sued the state of California because HSUS had changed the law for every producer of eggs in this state, and we're a big producer of eggs, and it was going to roll over, that policy was going to roll over to every cattle rancher and every single pork producer. I've fought back against these regulations, and I'll do it as governor.
Thank you all. Time now for a question from Susan Reisinger. It will be directed first to Mr. Foley, followed by Mr. McCoy, then Mr. Sloan, Mr. Bruning, Mr. Carlson, and Mr. Ricketts.
Nebraska ranks in the middle of the 50 states for individual tax burden based on a percentage of income. Do you think that's a good spot or a bad spot? And if it's a bad spot, how would you change that?
Well, I would challenge the premise of that question with all due respect. There are many national studies that show the tax burdens that Nebraskans are paying is among the highest in the country. Not the highest, but we're way up the charts. And I don't want to be there. You know, Nebraska has a spending problem. That's the core of the issue here. We've got to better control spending. And when we do that, we create room in the budget to create meaningful and permanent tax relief that the people of Nebraska so much deserve. And as the auditor, I've dug into that spending. I see where the waste is, the tens of millions of dollars being squandered every year by our Health and Human Services Department. That's an agency that needs to be reformed from day one, and I will do that. And I've said I will take that agency apart brick by brick because it needs to be rebuilt to an agency that respects vulnerable people and respects the taxpayer of our state. When we control spending, we bring down our tax burden, which is way too high.
Thank you, Mr. Foley. Mr. McCoy.
Well, I certainly am one who believes that Nebraska is full of amazing people, and we're never satisfied with average. I'd call middle of the pack average, and I've spent the last 6 years in the legislature doing everything I could to cut taxes. That's why I walked 9,000 doors when I first ran for the legislature, and that's why I was standing next to Governor Heineman 2 weeks ago as he signed $412 million in tax relief over the next 5 years into law. That's what I've worked for. The income tax cut that went into effect January 1st of this year was my priority bill 2 years ago. And today, as a member of the Revenue Committee, I've had the opportunity to work on every tax issue we've dealt with the last few years and going back throughout my time in the legislature. We've got to continue that process. We shouldn't be content with having the 12th highest overall property taxes, when you're factoring in ag, residential, commercial, all classes of property taxes. We shouldn't be satisfied with the 12th highest burden in America. We shouldn't be satisfied with 16th highest in income taxes in America. That's not what we ought to be about. We can benefit our economy the most by cutting taxes, both income and property and sales tax.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Mr. Sloan.
Taxes, as I said before, the number one issue in this election from every corner of the state. We simply have to have fundamental tax reform to compete as a state. We have a zero tax state to the north of us. We have a zero tax state to the west of us. And we can't get our arms around fundamental tax reform. When you ask the question why we have the economic issues we have and why we have the slow growth we have, and we are a slow growth state, the number one reason is the tax code is getting in the way. At 6.8%, we're not competitive. And so we have to lower that rate. I will lower the rate from 6.8 to 4% individual taxes because I think that's what's necessary to compete. I will apply the same sort of Reagan principles we used during the Reagan administration to move towards a flat tax, to move the rate from 6.8 to 4. It is very doable in this state. And it's just something that has to get done. I've got that experience. I know how to do it. It's about the next generation. Although it's a little personal with me because I retired in November to run. And so all the equity that I'd built up in my business over all those years, I just had the grand opportunity to write a check to the state of Nebraska for 6.8% of the value of that. That's why also, not only for our young people, that's why a lot of our retirees leave. This is the issue. And what I bring is 30 years of being a tax policy expert, both nationally and internationally.
Thank you, Mr. Sloan. Mr. Bruning.
Well, I'm anxious to talk about tax policy because I think we can do better. As a state senator, a young state senator, a long time ago, because I've been Attorney General for 12 years, but back in the 90s as a state senator, I worked on every tax bill I could work on, cutting taxes. 16 times I sponsored bills to cut taxes. I think we can do better. But remember, this is a very well-run state. I hate to hear just doom and gloom because I think we have so much to be thankful for here in Nebraska. But we can do better. We have to reduce property tax rates. We have to reduce income tax rates. I happen to be one of those people, and I know it's counterintuitive to some in the legislature, not the two that are here, they understand this, but others that are in the legislature who don't understand that if we reduce taxes, what we're going to get is businesses growing here, businesses choosing to locate here. Every time we cut taxes, it causes residents to want to stay here, retirees to want to stay here. If we can reduce taxes on retirement income, cutting taxes ends up making a rising tide that will lift all boats. So we have a great state, so much to be proud of, but we can do better. We can cut taxes. As governor, I'll make sure we do.
Thank you, Mr. Bruning. Mr. Carlson.
Thank you. In Nebraska, one of the things we do well is we balance the budget, and we can't adjourn until we do. That's a good thing. But we have to have a tax policy in our state that is both fair and competitive, and that's hard to come by. Certainly, Margot and I visited all 93 counties between August 1st and December 19th, and what did we hear? From every county, our property taxes are too high. We have the family farmland. I think those taxes are high as well. The problem in property tax is that it pays too much of K-12 education. It pays about 55%. I think it ought to be 45%. If it were 45%, it would take legislation to do that. And that would also mean that we have to find $100 million someplace else to take the place of those property taxes that aren't collected. And as people were telling us our property tax is too high, in the same breath they're not saying quit spending so much money on education, because education is important to people in Nebraska. Well, how can you lower property tax by $100 million? You're going to have to change the state aid formula, and I think that needs to be done. It's going to take legislation. I think that needs to be done. But how can sales and income tax pick up that $100 million? It can do it if we have a healthy, growing economy with substantially increasing private sector jobs every year. I think we're all in agreement on that. That has to happen, and that's the way you get more money coming into the state tills and you lower taxes. We need to lower the income tax rate. I agree with everybody that's indicated that. That needs to happen. But we've got to have a healthy, growing economy, and we can have that.
Need to move on, Mr. Carlson.
Thank you.
Mr. Ricketts.
We're a high-tax state. The only state around us that has a higher income tax is Iowa. And many of you maybe saw on Fox News that they reported that a company said that taking a basket of taxes that included inheritance taxes and vehicle taxes, Nebraska came in third worst behind California and New York. That's just not acceptable. This is where my business experience is so important. Because to have sustainable tax relief, we have to cut the cost of government and slow down the growth of state government. What we did at Ameritrade to Grow was leverage technology to be able to deliver a higher level service at a lower cost. People in our industry didn't think it could happen, but we did it. And we can do it in state government too. I'll give you just one quick example. I was talking to the Hospital Association, and they told me that CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, ranks us 50 out of 50, dead last, on leveraging technology to manage our Medicaid patients. So if you were a Medicaid patient, you could go to Hastings, get an MRI, and then go to Kearney and get another MRI, and we at the state wouldn't know any different until we got 2 bills in the mail. But if we had a good system of database management, we could tell Good Samaritan Hospital, don't do that second MRI. Go get it from Mary Lanning Hospital. And we could pay our providers in a more timely manner. By leveraging technology and other best business practices, we can drive down that cost, cut taxes, or put more money in the Property Tax Credit Relief Fund, and then allow our companies to expand and grow. That's how we're going to grow Nebraska.
Thank you, Mr. Ricketts. Now I would like to reintroduce to everyone Allison Lambert, who's a student here at Norfolk High School. She is going to ask a question that will first go to Mr. McCoy, followed by Mr. Carlson, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Bruning, Mr. Foley, and then Mr. Sloan. Allison.
What will you do to encourage a catch-up on the slowing rate of wind energy being used in Nebraska compared to neighboring states?
Mr. McCoy.
Well, thank you very much for that question, Allison. I think that making sure that we're improving our renewable energy is extremely important in Nebraska. But we have some challenges along that front. I served the first 4 years of my time in the legislature on the Natural Resources Committee. The landmark legislation that really has paved the way for continued development in wind energy happened while I was on that committee and since I've been in the legislature. You know, our other forms of renewable energy, be they solar or other means, we have a real challenge with an infrastructure, the grid, to transport that energy. We already produce power, more power, from our coal-fired power generation in this state, more than we actually use. That allows our farmers and ranchers, our business owners like myself and others to use power at a very inexpensive rate compared to a lot of the states around us. I think the future, there is a bright future and renewable energy, solar, wind, and otherwise. But there's a real challenge of how do we transport that power? How do we build the infrastructure necessary to utilize those types of renewable energy?
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Mr. Carlson.
Thank you, Allison, for that question. We do need to develop our potential in wind energy. And I'm looking for the day when the technology is developed that we can store wind. When that happens, wind is going to fly right to the top. We're not there yet. And so we have to have a backup system. And that backup system in Nebraska is coal-fired electrical generation and hydro. And we've got to keep that because that's really the foundation for our energy. But we need to develop wind and we need to develop solar. And yet wind and solar together have to be economical. Our citizens want energy that's dependable and that's economical. And so those two have to get to that point where there's economical or more so than coal-fired electrical generation. And different people have different views on how you calculate that, but that's got to come about. But when that technology is developed that would help wind, it'll be a different world. Ethanol, another form of energy, it's clean energy. And hopefully that will continue to be a big portion of the agricultural output in Nebraska. But energy drives our world. And we've got to be efficient in what we do. We've got to be sensible in what we do. We've got to be friendly to our environment in what we do. And certainly that's where we want to get. And in the meantime, I'm all for projects of wind and solar that come about, but there has to be a market for that energy. And we do develop more energy than what we can sell right now.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Mr. Ricketts.
Yeah, energy is obviously an important issue to the state. It's one of the reasons why I put a topic on that in my plan for manufacturing that I released today, talking about energy. And we should have a broad portfolio of energy options, including wind. And we should continue to have wind as part of our overall portfolio, because we don't know where that technology is going to go 20 years from now. We also can have the opportunity to sell that wind power to other states or private companies, like Google just purchased a bunch today. So we have opportunities there to expand wind. We also need to remember that we are a public power state, the only one left. And therefore, our first responsibility is to the ratepayers of this state. And think about this. Who does high energy prices hurt the worst? The people who can least afford to pay it. And you all here in Norfolk ought to know, with Nucor Steel, the largest energy consumer, single energy consumer in the state, they're here because of our competitive power rates, and we've got to keep them competitive. So we have to make sure that we have that and other forms of energy as well, such as natural gas, to be able to develop here in the state, so that we continue to have our companies able to expand here in the state. And that's one of the reasons why I think we should have a broad portfolio, but it's going to need to include coal and natural gas and other fossil fuels, because that's what's cost effective today. And we've got to make sure that our ratepayers pay low rates and that our companies can be competitive, or else we will see jobs leave the state. And my mission is to grow the state.
Thank you, Mr. Ricketts. Mr. Bruning.
Well, thank you for this question, Allison. You know, when I'm going to work and doing my job as Attorney General every day, I'm thinking about Ken from Hastings, who wrote me a letter. He sent me $3 and he said, I trust you. Go do the job and make our state better. And Ken's on a fixed income. He says, I'm sending more than I have budgeted. The problem with wind today is it's not quite ready. And the wind stops blowing. I know it doesn't always seem like that. When you're here in Nebraska, you wonder, does it ever stop? It does stop blowing. And when it does stop blowing, we have to have coal as a backup. And right now in America, I think you probably know it, but the Obama administration has a war on coal. And I've been trying to defend coal, not because I care about coal or natural gas or one thing or another. I care about low energy costs for you and for every Nebraskan. I care about low energy costs for Ken from Hastings, who's on a fixed income. That's what I care about, is keeping costs low. And wind, we're just not quite there yet with wind or other alternative sources of energy. Right now it's about coal, and coal is cheap, it's plentiful. We have 500 years of it in the ground just a little bit west of here, and we can keep using it. And I keep suing the EPA again and again for these ridiculous regulations that give us very minimal environmental gain for a massive cost. So for me, what it's about is keeping costs low so businesses and individuals can be successful without government interference.
Thank you, Mr. Bruning. Mr. Foley.
Allison, great question. You know, in recent months I've been out on Interstate 80 quite a bit, crisscrossing the state. And every time I'm out on I-80, I see those great big tractor trailers hauling by. And what are they carrying? They're carrying those enormous blades for wind machines. And those trucks aren't stopping in Nebraska. They're carrying those wind blades off to other states. Why not Nebraska? Early in my career, I had the privilege to work for Nebraska Public Power District as a planning analyst. And NPPD and the other public power entities in the state serve us very, very well. We've got very low-cost power in Nebraska compared to our neighboring states. That's our ace. But we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars into traditional coal and nuclear power plants, and we haven't yet recovered those costs. When we do recover those costs, and those plants are fully depreciated and written off, then we're going to go on like gangbusters with renewables, because the cost curve is coming down on wind. And the next generation of power plants is not going to be these great big huge steam kettles consuming all that coal. The next generation is going to be renewables and wind. And our public power entities are getting ready for that future, and I think it's going to be a very bright future for public power to carry us through the next 100 years in this state. Great question, Allison.
Thank you, Mr. Foley. Mr. Sloan.
Allison, thanks for asking the question, and you're going to make me feel really old here, because I'm going to tell you about my work for Mr. Reagan, and I realize that you probably weren't even born when Mr. Reagan was president. So I believe in free market principles. I believe government should stay out of the marketplace. I believe that one of the reasons that the national recession has not bounced back like it should have is we have a government that's involved in making decisions and picking winners and losers in the business world and in the energy world. In a free marketplace, wind has got to stand on its own, and it doesn't now. And Mr. Carlson is right. Senator Carlson is right. Until the storage technology is built up to where it can reasonably and efficiently store wind power electricity, it's not going to be competitive. What's going to be important in your generation, I don't think is renewables. I think it's natural gas. We have enough natural gas to fuel our economy and fuel Nebraska's growth for the decades to come that are going to be important to you. The key for us is natural gas and making it available and having the pipelines to make it available all across Nebraska, including Norfolk. And that's the reality, and that's the marketplace. And so it's nice to talk about wind power and renewables in the short term. The marketplace is going to drive natural gas, and I always believe in letting the marketplace act and not getting government involved. So you won't see me at a state level trying to get into one renewable or another.
Thank you, Mr. Sloan. We return now to another question from Jerry Genther. It'll go first to Mr. Bruning, followed by Mr. Carlson, then Mr. Foley, Mr. McCoy, Mr. Ricketts, and Mr. Sloan. Jerry.
As you see it, what is the strength of Nebraska's educational system, and in what areas could it be improved?
Well, thank you for that question, Jerry. As I see it, the strength of Nebraska's educational system is the students. We have some of the best people in the world. The people in this state understand that it's all about hard work, trying your hardest. When you look out and you see these kids, and I've got 2 kids in school right now still, and hopefully they're not tearing up the house right now, Dion, because they're home alone. We're a little nervous. They're 16 and 14. There are unbelievable students in our schools. But you know the other gem of our educational system in this state? It's the teachers. We have the most amazing teachers in this state. I come from a family of educators, and I'm very proud of that. And just wonderful people, wonderful teachers all across this state. You know, the teachers interviewed all the candidates on this stage, all 6 of us, and I'm very proud to have been endorsed by the Teachers Association. And I just think the world of the hard work they do. I could tell you story after story of teachers who, you know, needed to make sure that a student had that extra help and they stayed late to do that, or they needed to make sure that student had some food over the weekend and they got in their own pocket to buy it. We have teachers in this state that care deeply about every student. And it's an amazing state. It's a state like no other. And we have teachers that are different than anywhere else in the country. And because of that, we have students that can compete with anybody in the world globally. So I'm very proud to be a product of Nebraska's public education system. And I think every Nebraskan knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Bruning. Mr. Carlson.
Jerry, thank you for that question. In my view, in Nebraska, one of the things that we don't need is Common Core. We don't need another federal program trying to tell us what we do with our students. And I don't think Common Core really emphasizes excellence anyway. As I said in our visit across the state to 93 counties, people talked about property tax, but they didn't say, let's de-emphasize education. They know better than that. Education is so vitally important over our entire state. And our local school districts, some 250 of them, have got to have flexibility in terms of what they teach to the students in that locality. They need flexibility. They don't need mandates from the federal government. They don't need a lot of mandates from the state government either. I would like to see, as governor, and encourage every one of those 250 school districts to put into their plan a real objective to have every senior graduate with a marketable skill, either in technology or in the trades. Now think about that. If that happened, we no longer have to worry about minimum wage. If a high school graduate has a marketable skill, there are jobs available. Rural Nebraska needs those people. And then they can go on and receive further training from our community colleges, which are so efficient and so good. We have a good system. It can become better. We can better prepare our students to be able to meet the market that's in front of them. That's what we need to do.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Mr. Foley.
Jerry, good question. Let's start at the basics here. Parents are the primary educators of children. And the reason our students are soaring academically based on national standards is because we welcome and we encourage the role of parents in the education of our children. So long as we adhere to that founding principle, we will do very, very well academically. Like Senator Carlson, I want to tip my hat to the State Board of Education who rejected Common Core. That would have been a terrible mistake for Nebraska. You know, we're caught in a dilemma now because so many states have adopted Common Core. The national testing companies, the ACT exam people, the SAT exam people, the national textbook companies, they're writing now for Common Core. Fortunately, Texas just pulled out. Now they've got to rethink their strategies. And as more states get wise to Common Core, they'll pull out as well. And they'll start respecting the role of parents, our local school boards, who know best how to educate their children without all this ideological interference from Washington, D.C. We're going to keep pushing back against that intrusion of the federal government because that would be a terrible mistake. Education begins at home with the parents. We need to get those parents more and more involved, as they have been, in the education of their children. As long as we respect that, we will continue to outperform our peers throughout the country.
Thank you, Mr. Foley. Mr. McCoy.
Well, thank you, Jerry. I think the strength of Nebraska's education system is that we have parents and grandparents that care so much about their kids and grandkids that they get involved, that we have communities, school board members, teachers, administrators, philanthropists, business folks, and communities across this state who get involved in their local schools. And I think also the strength is the fact that we allow such a freedom of parental choice in Nebraska for education. And I think we can do more in that area as well, that allow parents to choose the education mechanism that's best for their kids. And then I think, and it's been said, that also one of our strengths is that we have resisted Common Core. You know, one-size-fits-all approach in education doesn't work any better than a one-size-fits-all approach in healthcare, which is why I have opposed so very much Obamacare's Medicaid expansion for the same reason. Washington, D.C. doesn't know how to educate our children better than we do. Nebraskans know how to do that better than anybody else. You know, I'm the only member of the legislature that's graduated from a community college. I understand what our community colleges, our technical schools can do for Nebraska and what they already do. And the partnership with education and career academies, you're starting to see them spring up in Nebraska, and I think that's a great thing. And then we need a new formula, a better, simpler formula for how we fund education.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Mr. Ricketts.
John, I'm also concerned about what's going on tonight because I've got 3 kids at home alone until my wife gets back to news. So I know what you're worried about. You know, the strength of our teaching system today is our teachers. My cousin Deanna is a teacher, and I've seen the long hours she puts in to make sure she is prepared for class the next day. And she spends her own money on materials to make sure the kids have them. And I'm against Common Core for a lot of the same reasons we've talked about. It's a top-down approach that's never been proven to work. But probably more devastating is that it takes all the creativity out of teaching. And if you're just doing it by rote example, because you can't go out of the guidelines, then we're going to drive our best and brightest out of the teaching field, and we need them there teaching our kids. So what can we do to improve it? Well, you know, when I was in school, in junior high, I had to take industrial arts, welding, woodworking, cooking, sewing. But my West Side School District doesn't require that anymore, and I think that's a huge disservice to our kids not to expose them to those opportunities available in the trades. Because I know there's companies all across the state that tell me they can't find enough welders or machinists or electricians. I mentioned Chief Industries earlier, paying $20 an hour to a welder. They've got 30 positions open. Here in Norfolk, you've got 500 positions, job openings here. So making sure that we have career vocational training as a priority in all of our high schools will help make sure that our kids will have the opportunity to take those jobs. And that's one of the ways we're going to grow Nebraska.
Thank you, Mr. Ricketts. Our next question comes from Jenna Renstrom. It'll be directed first to Mr. Sloan, followed by Mr.
Can I answer the last question?
You're right. I'm
Thanks.
sorry, Mr. Sloan.
We'll double up. Thank you. My father was the school superintendent in Neely, Nebraska. And so I grew up with public education. And my dad didn't make a lot of money being school superintendent in Neely, but he gave me something that was a lot more valuable. He showed up every morning and unlocked the doors for the first event in the morning, and he didn't leave until the last event at night. And he did that in my entire life. He thought education was that important, and one of the things I've learned from my dad is that wherever he goes, he's 91 now, we still run into people who say, I was your student, or I worked with you, or you made a difference in my life. And walking in tonight, someone said, your dad was my principal. I can't go anywhere in this state. Whatever I accomplish as governor will not be as important as what he accomplished as a school superintendent. He believed, as the other gentleman said tonight, the strength of our education system in this state begins with great teachers. He loved great coaches and parents being involved. I think the one thing we could do to improve the school system is start leveraging career opportunities at an earlier age. I really want us to start having career opportunity discussions starting in junior high. Help students understand what their talents are. And then by the time they get to high school, think about that and plan their college careers accordingly. I think that's the one place we're failing, is we're not allowing each student to take their own talents and understand those and take them as far as they can. And thanks for letting me go over a little bit.
And thank you for keeping me on my toes here. Now it's time for a question from Jenna Renstrom. First to Mr. Sloan, then Mr. Ricketts, McCoy, Mr. Foley, Mr. Carlson, and Mr. Bruning.
More states, including neighboring Iowa, are allowing gay marriages, but Nebraska has held firm in opposition of the idea. Should that continue?
Mr. Sloan.
Oh, I'm back on. Okay, thanks. I'm opposed to having gay marriage in Nebraska, and so the reason for that is that I know from my own marriage, and I also know from my own faith that it's a faith-based concept built in many faiths and for centuries, and it has its own meaning and its own definition, and marriage shouldn't be made something else by government. I never want government getting in the midst of people's expression of faith. And so while you'll find that I'm very conservative on constitutional principles and equality, I don't want government defining definitions for various faiths at this point. And so I will be opposed to gay marriage.
Thank you, Mr. Sloan. Mr. Ricketts.
I believe marriage is between a man and a woman. And so do the voters of Nebraska. We approved it overwhelmingly and put it into our Constitution. And as governor, I will fight to protect that Constitution because I think that's important. Marriage has been the foundation of society, well, since forever. And we can't change that just with a wave of a law. And the other thing that goes along with this, and we've seen this happen in other states, is the infringement upon religious freedom if you do change that definition. You know, as a Christian, I see my work as an expression of my Christianity. And what we've seen in other states like Oregon and Washington and New Mexico is that Christian businesses, florists, photographers, bakers, who have declined to serve a gay wedding because they didn't believe in it are being coerced into doing it. And so now here we have the government telling a Christian business that they are required to celebrate something which they're morally opposed to. That's just not right. That's not what our founding fathers believed in. And that's why I think it's so important that we continue to stand up for marriage between a man and a woman here in Nebraska.
Thank you, Mr. Ricketts. Mr. McCoy, your response, please.
Well, I very much support the constitutional amendment the voters of Nebraska put in place in the year 2000 with over 75% of those voting, that marriage should be between one man and one woman. And I believe Nebraska has held firm on that issue and should continue to hold firm on that issue. I care very deeply about this because of our protection of our religious liberties. We dealt with a piece of legislation this year in the unicameral that would have required Nebraskans, good, hardworking business owners and business people across Nebraska, and those are involved in some of our great faith-based organizations and religious organizations and churches across our state, to check their faith at the door when they leave for work in the morning. That's just not right. And I think that we understand the meaning of family. We understand the value of marriage in Nebraska. And as the next governor of this state, I will protect it.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Mr. Foley.
Thank you. Let me answer the question this way. A month ago, Brendan Enck, a brilliant software developer out in Silicon Valley, California, was named to the CEO position of the Mozilla Corporation. This is a big deal. 10 days after his board named him the CEO, they forced him to resign. What was the great offense that Brendan Enck committed? It was discovered that 6 years earlier, when there was an item on the ballot in California, he supported the traditional definition of marriage, one man, one woman. And the activists out there became so enraged when they learned this that they demanded that he be removed from that company, and he was. That ideology is in California today, and it's making its way toward Nebraska. We're going to resist that. We're going to stand firm behind our principles, our state constitution, which defines marriage properly. One man, one woman. Every senator gets one bill per year to designate it as a priority bill. Senator Chambers, a few years ago when I was there in the unicameral, designated one of those gay rights bills as his priority bill. This is a bill that would have been a playpen for trial lawyers to cause all kinds of problems in our culture and our society. I filed 21 amendments against that bill and stopped it. I'm going to stand firm for traditional values in Nebraska as your next governor.
Thank you, Mr. Foley. Mr. Carlson.
Thank you. I don't think any of us are going to differ on opinions in this matter. Now, one of the things that I believe the most important thing the state government does in Nebraska is keep its citizens safe. I really believe that. That's what we have to do. But I totally support our current law, which defines marriage as that between a man and a woman. Faith is very, very important to me. And my faith leads me not to adopt homosexual, lesbian lifestyle. However, I have acquaintances that are gay. I have acquaintances that are lesbian. And their view can be different than mine. And I honor that because in Nebraska we are to treat everyone with respect and dignity. I didn't support the sexual orientation bill. I was part of the filibuster on that bill. But I know it's important that we treat people with respect and dignity. But I don't think it's right to set apart a separate class and call them protected in the same category that we call other groups protected. So I appreciate our current law, and I think we need to stay with that, but let's be respectful and let's show dignity.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Mr. Bruning.
Well, I believe marriage is between a man and a woman, and I think that's well said to say that every Nebraskan has value. I care deeply about every Nebraskan, gay or straight. I just do. I think it's the right way to be. But I personally believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. And as Attorney General, I defended the will of Nebraskans. 70% in 2000 voted for the constitutional amendment, including me. And I defended that law, that constitutional amendment in St. Louis in 2004, and I won that case. So you know exactly where I stand. But I want to make the point to you because I know many of you are undecided. Many Nebraskans watching this on TV tonight or on the internet are undecided. This is yet another case where I am proven and I am tested and I have the experience. The other candidates on this stage, good men all, can talk about these issues. I have experience dealing with these issues, whether it's immigration, whether it's this issue of gay marriage, whether it's taxes. Regardless of what the issue is, you'll find that I have experience. I led the lawsuit against Obamacare. I don't just talk about it. Medicaid expansion, I won the piece of the case that allowed the state of Nebraska not to expand our Medicaid program. I created a Medicaid fraud unit in the Attorney General's office that returned $77 million to Nebraska taxpayers. Experience matters.
Thank you, Mr. Bruning. We want to have enough time for two more questions of the candidates and then move into our rebuttal segment and closing comments. So these final two questions, we're going to restrict the candidates' answers to 60 seconds instead of 90 in interest of time. Okay? Our question comes from Susan Reisinger. It's directed first to Mr. Foley, then Mr. McCoy, Mr. Sloan, Mr. Bruning, Mr. Carlson, and Mr. Ricketts.
The decision to not expand Medicaid in Nebraska has left 55,000 Nebraskans without affordable health care they would have if they moved across the border into Iowa. Why should they remain in Nebraska?
Interesting question. It's been, as you know, a very hot topic in the legislature in recent years, and it'll come back, no doubt, next year. You know, I'm the only candidate running for this office who is an alumni of the Appropriations Committee in the legislature. That's the committee that writes the state budget. The Medicaid program used to be a relatively small slice of the pie of our state budget. Today, it's the biggest thing we do. Medicaid is a $1.8 billion program, growing by leaps and bounds. And as it grows, it pushes out the other slices of pie, like higher education. 1 out of every 8 Nebraskans is now on Medicaid. And President Obama wants to expand it further. And I'm saying no. But what about those people? Good question. What about those people who are victims of Obamacare and they're caught in that gap? We've got to find creative health care solutions for those folks. This isn't their fault. They didn't do this, and we need to reach out and find a creative solution to help them.
Thank you, Mr. Foley. Mr. McCoy.
Well, I think those individuals should stay in the state of Nebraska because we have the best quality of life of any state in America. And we have worked hard the last 2 years to stop Obamacare's Medicaid expansion. The tidal wave came to Nebraska and it fell short at our border. I helped lead that charge the last 2 years. And the reason I did, and the reason why I think this is one of the biggest issues of our time, is because it's that lure of free federal money that's just you and I's tax dollars. And that's what this is really about. It's about the ability as states to have control of our own destiny. That's what being a strong governor is. That's what Governor Heinemann has been in the state for nearly 10 years. That's what I intend to be as the next governor, to work creatively to find solutions, buying insurance across state lines, allowing businesses to pool together, creative concepts like that. That's what this issue is about.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Mr. Sloan.
Susan, thanks for the question. It's a legitimate question. I, too, would oppose Medicaid expansion simply because we don't know what the costs are going to be and we don't know whether the federal government will live up to its promises. Given this current administration, I have no faith the federal government will live up to its promises, and they're in good faith. I couldn't sign on to expanding Medicaid. But that doesn't answer the question, and you asked the good question. We have a health care cost problem in this country. And that means we've got a health care cost problem in this state. While the Obama administration tried to turn it into an insurance problem, it was never really an insurance problem. It was a delivery problem. We deliver health care in the most expensive way possible in too many cases in the emergencies rooms across the state, and we end up paying for it when it doesn't get paid by any source. We have to change the regulations and be cutting edge in terms of our delivery systems, and there's no one-size-fits-all. Omaha's going to be different than Chadron. And I'll work to make sure that we find different delivery systems to more effectively get to more people cheaper. If we don't get better cheaper, we won't solve the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Sloan. Mr. Bruning.
Well, as I mentioned before, I led the lawsuit against Obamacare. Part of the victory of that case, there was a massive loss, and I'm sorry. I thought we had it. I saw John Roberts every day, and I thought the Chief Justice would do the right thing and strike down that law. But we did win the piece that allowed this state and these legislators, and I applaud them, to choose not to expand Medicaid. Now, why does that matter? Well, for me, the reason that matters is because I want to prioritize education. I want to prioritize roads. If Medicaid continues to grow, something has to shrink. And what's that something? It's education, it's roads, it's the other priorities of the state budget. And we can't allow Medicaid to take over the entire budget. And you can't trust the federal government. Brian Sloan is right. The federal government promised they'd pay 40% of special education costs. They now pay 16%. That's why we couldn't expand Medicaid. It was the right thing to do, and I applaud the legislature.
Thank you, Mr. Bruning. Mr. Carlson.
Susan, to try and answer the question first, why should people stay in the state? I will say this. As governor, I haven't forgotten about the problem. It is a problem. I think we need to help people develop better skills so that they can have a better job, and this helps them cope with this situation. But remember, in Nebraska, we have a balanced budget. And the point is, and the truth is, government cannot provide everything for everybody. When we get to the point of voting on a balanced budget, and I've gone through 4 of these cycles, on a $7 billion budget, when we're ready to vote on it, we're arguing about $20,000 and $40,000 and $50,000. The federal government plan didn't fit what we need. Had we implemented that, and had this been the 4th year, we'd have had to add $70 million to our budget. How do we do that? Cut services, raise taxes. We haven't forgotten about it. We have to deal with it. We have to find a better way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Mr. Ricketts.
I agree with Governor Hyman in resisting Medicaid expansion. It's an expansion of Obamacare and has all the problems and infringements on religious freedom that go along with it. As also, the federal government is going to renege on their promise. When you're spending $1 and borrowing 42 cents, at some point that's unsustainable, and we here, the taxpayers, will have to pay for it. And we can't sign up for an unlimited liability like that. So why should those folks stay here? Because we got great jobs. I talked about that chief industries job. It comes with benefits. So rather than invest our dollars in government dependency, let's invest them in job training programs to help people take those good paying jobs we have all across the state. Because if we do expand Medicaid, we will have to crowd out other investments like education, like roads. So let's invest in that job training and help people get off of government dependency so they can take those jobs and we can help grow the state.
Thank you, Mr. Ricketts. Now I'd like to ask Kaylee Philbrick to come to the microphone, a student at Norfolk High School. Her question will go first to Mr. McCoy, followed by Mr. Carlson, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Bruning, Mr. Foley, and then Mr. Sloan.
Hi. Okay. What would be your main focus if you were to be elected as our governor?
Well, certainly cutting taxes and providing a more favorable tax climate for Nebraskans is my number one priority. It has been my 6 years in the legislature, and it will be as the next governor of this state. For young people just like yourself, for my 4 kids over there, your kids, your grandkids, that's the future of our state, is making sure that we allow young farmers and ranchers to stay here, that we allow those that want to start a business like I did, like my family did, to prosper and to grow and to create jobs, to make a payroll. That's the future of our state. That's why cutting taxes is the issue of our time. It's the future of our very state that's at stake here. And that will be my focus as governor. It's difficult to do. I know it. I've done it. I don't just talk about cutting taxes. I'm the only one on this stage that has had my name on tax cuts.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Mr. Carlson.
Thank you again for that question. My top priority would be the safety of our citizens, followed by an excellent education program. I've gone into that a little bit about marketable skill for every graduating senior, a good system of roads and bridges, statewide water sustainability plan, my bill, that comes to fruition and becomes the truth and becomes something that really saves us in the future as far as economics are concerned in Nebraska. And let's do this while we have lowering taxes. Sounds like a miracle. What we need are those good private sector jobs that are substantially increased every year, allows us to lower the tax rate, bring more money into the state to help us do what we need to do, and we'll get where we need to go. So those would be my priorities.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Mr. Ricketts.
My number one priority as governor will be to grow Nebraska. How do we do that? We improve education, especially career and vocational training, to help our young people take those jobs that we have out there available right now. Grow the economy, especially agriculture and manufacturing. And cutting property taxes is part of my plan on how we grow agriculture here in the state. And then just creating more and better paying jobs here in the state. How do we do that? Well, it's about getting out of our own way, whether it's senseless regulation or taxes that are too high. We need to address those issues to make our companies more competitive. That will allow them to expand and hire more of your children and grandchildren, broaden the tax base, and allow us to cut taxes again and get into a virtuous cycle of growth where we're always looking to cut taxes, expand the economy, and cut taxes again. That's how we grow Nebraska, and that'll be my number one priority as governor.
Thank you, Mr. Ricketts. Mr. Bruning.
Well, my priority as governor would be to cut taxes. And Senator McCoy, I know it was a long time ago when I was a state senator, but I had my name on a few tax cut bills too. It may have been an awful long time ago, but I believe that cutting taxes is the right thing to do. The reason is because it helps businesses grow. It helps families be successful. We have to reduce the tax burden. I wish every Nebraskan could see what I see the beauty of the state as you travel every corner of it. But what you hear sometimes is pretty stark. Property taxes are too high. We have to reduce them. You've seen valuations. You know this if you're in agriculture, up 25, 30, 35% without levies going down. That means a higher tax bill. That is not sustainable. We have to reduce property taxes. We have a tax problem in this state. As governor, it will be my priority to cut those taxes.
Thank you, Mr. Bruning. Mr. Foley.
Thank you. As Chief Executive Officer of the state of Nebraska, job one is going to be to reform our Health and Human Services Agency. That's 1/3 of our state government, $3.4 billion, 5,600 employees, all in one agency. And it's broken. My auditors and I found a lady who ingratiated herself with that HHS system, and she set herself up as the legal guardian for 688 Nebraskans and began pilfering the money from vulnerable people who are elderly with dementia, who need a legal guardian. And she did that on the recommendation so often of HHS, who ignored all the warning signals and weren't paying attention. That agency needs a thorough scrubbing, and I'm going to do it as your next governor.
Thank you, Mr. Foley. Mr. Sloan.
Yes, thank you. So I have to apologize to Mr. McCoy. A very selfish fellow named Ronald Reagan put his name on the bill I worked on, so I didn't get my name on there. So, number one issue that I'll focus on, and thank you for the question, is leadership, the type of leadership to unify this state, I mean unify this state, around a bigger vision and bigger ideas. We can do better than mountain lions. We need to be focused on what this state's going to look like 20 or 30 years from now. We need big ideas around what it's going to be for your generation, where those opportunities are going to be that don't exist right now. This is the first generation of Nebraskans that views that it has fewer opportunities than its parents. That's unacceptable. We have to grow this state. We have to get fundamental tax reform done. We have to reform the educational system to become better and more efficient and help prepare our young people for occupations in this state and connect those dots for them. And thirdly, we have to invest in infrastructure.
We need to move on, Mr. Sloan. Thank you, sir. We now enter in what could be called the rebuttal round of this debate. Each candidate will have 1 minute to comment on something he has heard tonight, and then, if he so chooses, pose a question to a fellow candidate. That candidate who's on the receiving end of the question will also have a minute to respond. So we begin with Mr. Carlson. Your comments and question.
Thank you. And before I get into my question, which I'm going to ask Pete Ricketts, Senator McCoy, in 2007, I voted for the biggest tax refund in the history of the state. So I'd like you to know that because I'm going to compliment you in a little bit. No state government experience, I think, is problematic. Too much state government experience and little private sector experience is also problematic. I think that the most balanced gubernatorial candidates in small business and state government experience are Senator McCoy and me. Now, if Bo Pelini left Nebraska and they had to hire a new football coach, would they hire a head coach who had not coached football? I don't think so. If you have to have heart surgery, do you want to go to someone that's performed a lot of heart surgery, or do you go to someone that's new out of school, that's got a lot of good ideas, and wants to practice on you? I think I know who you'd go to. So I want to ask this in a nice way to Pete. How will you compensate for your lack of state government experience as governor? And did you give any consideration to running for the legislature at any time where you could have served before becoming governor?
Well, Tom, thank you for that question. You know, Governor Heineman has done a great job of keeping a lid on taxes and spending. And now we need to build on that foundation and take it to the next level. To do that, you're going to need somebody who's got new ideas, a fresh perspective. Somebody who's got a track record of success in the private sector, a real world conservative. I'm the only candidate on the stage who's helped grow a small Nebraska company into a large one. And that's the fundamental issue we're facing here in the state. How do we grow Nebraska? I've met payroll. I've helped create jobs. I've dealt with regulation. I know what it's like to be able to do these things. And I want to bring that experience to state government to help drive down the costs, to be able to invest wisely, and to grow jobs. I've been developing relationships with the state senators who are going to be coming into the unicameral to start working with those folks now, because the governor can't do anything by himself. He's going to have to work with those state senators. And I've been working on building those relationships so I can do that when I step into the job.
Thank you, Mr. Ricketts. We continue with Mr. Foley. Your comments and question, please.
Thank you. My question is for Tom Carlson. Tom, you mentioned the water issue earlier, and I want to compliment you because you've done a lot of heavy lifting on the water question, including LB 1098 that was just signed into law, which is last week, I guess it was. Under that LB 1098, the Natural Resources Commission will be expanded now from 16, I think, to 27 members. And this Water Sustainability Fund is going to spend large sums of public money on some new water projects. That's good work. But with my auditor hat on now, how can we be assured that those millions of dollars that will be spent on those new water projects is going to be set up properly, with those projects prioritized correctly, so that all regions of the state benefit from that new fund?
Okay, thank you, Mike Foley. That is a good question. It's a very reasonable question. The new Natural Resource Commission will be expanded from 16 members to 27 members, and it will include people that have various interests in water issues across the state, not just irrigation. That's a good thing. We put more people at the table. There'll be better decisions made. You know, if you all sit around the same table and you all have the same ideas, how much progress do you make? It's uncomfortable when you have different ideas, but as you move along and you come to consensus about things, it is a good thing. The funding is vital because that commission will make decisions about what projects should be recommended that will contribute toward water sustainability. If it doesn't contribute toward water sustainability, it won't be approved. And I have every confidence that this new commission will do the job the way they're supposed to, and we as a state will reach water sustainability, and that's one of the greatest things that I think could have ever happened in the state of Nebraska. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Mr. McCoy, your comments and question.
Well, thank you, and my question is for Pete Ricketts.
I'm popular tonight.
Pete, in 2006, here's what a Lincoln Journal-Star editorial said about your immigration position. Quote, Ricketts' position includes a willingness to allow illegal workers a path to legal residency. The Omaha World-Herald said this about your position in 2006. When questioned in Superior, Ricketts spoke at length on immigration, including his support for stronger border security and for some type of a program to allow people here illegally now to gain legal status. So my question to you, Pete, is very straightforward. The Omaha World-Herald asked you in 2006 a very simple yes or no question. do you support some type of program that would allow immigrants currently here illegally to gain legal status? What was your one-word answer to that question back then?
So this is typical politician talk, taking things out of context and talking about it, trying to make it look like it's bad. I am against amnesty. I've been very clear on the campaign trail that I've been against amnesty the whole time. And in fact, when I've talked about taxpayer benefits for illegal immigrants, I've said absolutely not, no way, period. I've also said that employers ought to use E-Verify so they know the people they're hiring. The things Mr. McCoy is referring to when he talks about a pathway, that pathway involved going home. That's how they were going to get it. And think about this. If we didn't know they were here illegally, how would we know if they went home and applied and got back in line and did it the right way? The reason I am not in favor of amnesty or giving taxpayer benefits to illegal immigrants is because it's not fair and it's not right. Those are reserved for people who are here legally, and we need to treat the people who are following the rules properly.
Thank you, Mr. Ricketts. We continue with Mr. Bruning. Your comments and question, please.
Well, there's been a lot of talk on this stage tonight about experience, and I'm proud of my experience. I've worked alongside Governor Heinemann. I've worked alongside Governor Johans. I've worked as a legislator to cut taxes, 16 bills that I carried as a legislator in my time there to cut taxes. In 12 years as Attorney General, I'm proud of that record. A Medicaid fraud unit that's returned $77 million to Nebraska taxpayers. Experience matters. Now, one of the things that's really worked for me is to be surrounded by the smartest people I can find. I get credit in the Attorney General's office for great, great people. There's a lot of great people on this stage. One of the guys that I think is a great person is Brian Sloan. And I wish we ought to be sharing rides to events because I've been wanting to pick his brain. Brian, I do consider you a tax expert. You rose to the top of your trade. You know I think very highly of you. What's the first thing we do if we want to cut income tax and cut property tax? What's the first thing we begin to cut out of state government? There's a lot we can do. I want to pick your brain, and I want to do this for an hour afterwards too, by the way. Please. He's a very smart guy. I want to listen to him.
Well, that's a loaded question, and John,
I don't mean it to be. I don't mean it to be.
I've got to get to Lincoln tonight. Where this starts is understanding the problem. And the problem is that the growth in spending is higher than the growth in taxes. And so the first step, John, is really to get buy-in as to what the nature of the problem is. And that's really just putting the numbers out. And the number that's important is not just state taxes, not just income taxes, but as you referred to, property taxes and sales taxes. And it's not only state spending, but it's city spending, county spending, school spending. And we cannot continue to go down a track where the growth in that spending exceeds the growth in our economy. And the first step is to create a simple set of metrics and decide what we're going to do. Governor Heinemann went after this in one big bill. I think we're going to have to do it incrementally, and we're going to have to broaden the base as Ronald Reagan did. And we're also going to have to cut spending and make sure those are absolutely directed to rate reduction each and every year. And I think over a period of 3 or 4 years, incrementally with this legislature, we can get it done. But I'd love to talk to you anytime at any length.
But probably not tonight.
But not tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Sloan. Mr. Ricketts, your turn for comments and question.
Well, the fundamental question that we're facing here in Nebraska is how do we grow the state? And I've been talking about this a lot. I put out a plan on how we grow agriculture, how we grow manufacturing. You can look in your own community. We talked a little bit about it here tonight. With the great cooperation between the Nebraska Department of Economic Development, the city of Norfolk, and Nucor Steel to make sure we had the proper infrastructure in place to bring Tejas Tubular here to create 200 jobs right here in Norfolk. My question is for Mike Foley. Next week, he's going to get to ask me a question, and I won't get a chance to ask him back. So my question to you, Mike, is, we got to grow jobs in the state. What are your thoughts on how we do that?
Pete, it all starts with the private sector, which is your background, of course, private sector. We can't look to government to grow jobs. We can't create jobs within government. In fact, we've got to downsize government. And the way to do that is to create a more favorable tax climate in Nebraska. It's been pointed out a number of times tonight. We have an oppressive tax system in Nebraska, the highest income tax of any state in the region except Iowa. We've got to fix that. We've got to drive that down. We've got to flatten our tax rates, as Brian Sloan would remind us over and over again. He's right. We've got to flatten that tax burden. When we do that, our businesses here can expand and create opportunities for my children, your children, our grandchildren. And businesses outside the state look at Nebraska, and they're very attracted to Nebraska because they know of our work ethic here. And it's appealing to them. But they try to pencil out the deal, and it doesn't work because of our high taxes. That's got to be fixed, and it will be when Mike Foley's the governor of Nebraska.
Thank you, Mr. Foley. We finish with Mr. Sloan. Your comments and question, please.
You know, I have a comment and a question, and since John was nice to me, now I've got to redirect. We've had some great Republican governors in this state, and Governor Orr is here, and Governor Johans and Governor Heineman have created a legacy of a really terrific, dignified leadership in this state. And one of the things that hasn't been said tonight, so I'll just bring it in the open because I'm a plain speaker, is this forum is a great forum, and I really do respect and like these guys. But tomorrow when we go home, we're going to turn on our TVs, we're going to open our mailboxes, and by tomorrow you're going to think this is all about money and mudslinging again. I think there's a dignity that comes with running for governor. It's a privilege to run for governor. And I think a little bit of what we're doing, whether we know who's funding it or not, is beneath the dignity of being governor. And so my question to all of us is, can we just up our game a little bit?
Thank you, Mr. Sloan. I think at this point it's appropriate, as our time is drawing to an end of our time together, we're going to move into closing remarks by each of the candidates. We begin with John Bruning.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, it's hard to believe that a kid who grew up selling pop at Husker games and being a janitor in college is standing before you today as a candidate for governor of this great state. But that's what Nebraska is all about. We rise early, we do our jobs, we pay our taxes, we go to church, we earn our way. What we deserve in return from our governor is a fair shake. We deserve an opportunity to grow free from the burden and the restriction and the interference of government. I've fought back. I've been tested. I've demonstrated the leadership needed to protect your opportunity to succeed. And I've defended the principles and the values that we hold close as Nebraskans. In this campaign, I've worked hard every day to earn your trust and support. As governor, I'll work harder every day to keep it. I humbly ask for your vote tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bruning. It's now Mr. Carlson's turn.
A vote for Tom Carlson is a vote for someone who is one of you. I live in rural Nebraska. I've lived there most of my life, and I'm the only Republican candidate who can say that. I know your values. They're my values. I know your concerns. They're my concerns. I know the importance of agriculture, livestock production, and the importance of a sustainable water policy for generations into the future. This is a vital concern for every Nebraska citizen. Whether they realize it or not, you realize it. I know that when rural Nebraska prospers, urban Nebraska prospers. Like Governor Heineman has done, I'll carry the fight to keep the Humane Society of the United States out of Nebraska. But we should all support our local humane societies and help them. As governor, I will be your relentless advocate, your untiring leader, and a voice for all Nebraskans. I need your help. I need your vote. I need your support. I need your voice. Let's partner together, and we will make the good life even better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. We now turn our attention to Bo McCoy.
Well, thank you. Anyone who says that there are no differences between us as candidates couldn't be farther from the truth. There are clear differences between us on key issues like the death penalty, education, illegal immigration, and taxes. And you've heard us discuss some of those issues here tonight. I think there's a lot at stake for Nebraska in this primary election. And we can't risk electing a convenient conservative, someone who has a history of saying one thing one day. If we elect someone who hasn't quite figured out if they're a conservative or not, we run the risk of undoing the conservative agenda that Governor Heinemann worked so hard for, and I've been a part of that over these last many years. Some have called me a pit bull for my conservative beliefs. Anyone that knows me knows I'm a conservative through and through, and I won't waver on my conservative values. I ask for your support and your vote on May 13th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. We turn our attention to Pete Ricketts.
You know, as I've traveled around the state, people have asked me, Pete, why do you want to be governor? And at the end of the day, the answer is, I want to help grow Nebraska. You know, we've talked about the great job that Governor Heinemann has done and how we have to take it to the next level. To do that, you're going to need somebody who's got fresh ideas, a new perspective, a track record of success in the private sector, a real-world conservative. And I am that candidate. I'm the only candidate that's helped grow a small Nebraska company. And I want to take those skills and apply them to state government to help drive down costs, make wise investments, and grow jobs. You'll see we'll be able to cut taxes and have common sense regulation. Our companies will expand and be able to hire more of your children and grandchildren. We'll be able to unleash the potential here in the state for you, your families, and your future. That's my vision for Nebraska. But I can't do it alone. I need the help of you and thousands of other Nebraskans all across the state. Please join my campaign. I'm asking for your vote. And together we can move Nebraska forward. Thank you again for all coming here tonight. God bless and have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Ricketts. We continue with Mike Foley.
Thank you very much. You know, Nebraska has never had a governor who previously served as state auditor. State auditor gives you a very unique perspective on the operations of state government. It's a $10 billion machine with enormous complexity and lots of moving parts and lots of things that can and do go wrong. If you like the job that I've done for you as your state auditor this past 8 years, you ain't seen nothing yet, because I'm going to serve you so well as your next governor. On day one, I'm going to sit down with that new state auditor, whoever he or she may be. And I'm going to say, look, you've inherited one of the best staffs in state government, tremendously accomplished people. Turn them loose in every agency that's under my purview and bring forward all those problems, and they're there. Bring them forward out in the public square, and then we'll sit down and talk about how to get them fixed. Because we can do a better job for the people of Nebraska. They deserve it, and they'll get it when Mike Foley's the governor of this state. Thank you very much for being here tonight. God bless you. Go Huskers.
Thank you, Mr. Foley. Finally, closing comments from Brian Sloan.
You know, thank you everybody for coming out tonight. And unlike Senator McCoy, I'm going to suggest that all these people up here are my friends, and I'm going to stipulate they're all conservative. We should be celebrating this group of people. We have 6 strong candidates in this field, and the GOP's never been stronger. The question is not who's the most conservative on somebody's scale. The question is, who do you want to be the next leader of the state? Who do you think has those qualities that can bring the state together and tackle big issues and has a big vision for the state? And my view of politics, and I've been around politics for a long time, including serving as Governor Heinemann's campaign treasurer, my view is when voters go into the booth, it's a question of trust. Who do they trust to lead the state? You demonstrated tonight that you certainly have the capacity to distinguish between all of us. So just go into the booth and think about leadership and who do you trust, and kind of ignore this whole bit of mudslinging between candidates. Thanks. And I'd like your vote because I hope you trust me.
Well, I would like to thank all the candidates for their participation tonight. Let's give them all a round of applause. And let's thank our media panelists and our students from Norfolk High also. We have approximately 3 weeks until the primary election, and it's encouraging for me, and I think for all of you, that we realize that the ballots you cast in the Republican gubernatorial primary will be informed ones, at least in part, to your participation and attendance in the debate tonight. So thank you for attending, and good night.